welcome. We're so excited that you're here with us. And our guest today is Freedom Inc. co-author, Professor Isaac Getz. And that's just really, really cool to have him on. And as usual, the conversation will be facilitated by our resident storyteller, Lucas Freitas. If you have any insights that come through from the conversation, make sure to share them with the hashtags Workwise and Semco Style on social media so we can connect with you there. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Lucas, and then I'll see you over in the chat. Thanks. Lucas, over to you.
Good afternoon, Mariana. Good morning, Professor Getz.
Hello.
That is joining us in the audience. I'm broadcasting from Auckland this morning. Today with us is Isaac Getz, the author of Freedom Inc. and professor at the École Supérieure de Commerce in Paris, Europe. Bonsoir, Professor Getz, ça va?
Ça va très bien, merci. Bonsoir.
Professor Getz and Ricardo Semler had a conversation earlier this week on Monday as a warm-up for our talk today. We will soon be sharing this material with you online. And I would like to start posing to Professor Getz the first question. Isaac, when we look at the timeline of leadership in people-centered corporations, we go way back to 1924 with 3M CEO Bill McKnight. We pass by Robert Townsend in the 50s, and then there was this thought of McGregor in the 60s and the experience of Gore. And we get to Ricardo Semler on the 80s with the Semco experience, Maverick, and after that, the 7-day weekend. So when we look to this timeline, the past 30 years, movements of self-management and people-centric initiatives sprouted in different places. I see a scenario with many castles and citadels, like in the end of the Dark Ages. Are we about to see a Silk Route connecting those initiatives?
Okay, I will be contrarian to your questions. I don't see any road to connect anything in the past beyond certain influences obvious that went from McGregor, for example, to Townsend, or from McGregor to Bill Gore. Some people influenced each other. I published even an article where I draw kind of a chart of cross-influences. However, what's interesting is what is happening today. The past, in fact, we observed, at least through my work, about maybe 30, 40 companies. And I'm talking about the companies that I and together with Brian Carney, we have studied between 2005 and 2009. At that time, we studied about 30 companies in 4 or 5 countries that existed and were functioning in that mode for at least 20 years, and all of them were in the top of their industries. That is marginal as a number. We tried to understand what kind of leadership style brought them to this situation. However, it's largely unsatisfactory, which brought us in France, and this is the only country where it happens, to try and to make that type of companies not a marginal phenomenon, but a norm. And I can report that it happened in France, and it became a corporate norm today.
I see. It's interesting because I do see other silos of people-centric corporations. If we look into Holland and what happened there with Buurtzorg and all of the Semco style oriented companies, I think there are close to 100 companies there. And Japan, it's quite people-centered and self-management, strong movement sprouting in there. So, but I understand your point of view. Professor, when we think of the opposite of liberated companies. So this management by control, this the old way we are all seeing widespread in the planet. So this management by control comes from a belief that people don't want to work or to learn. It is actually an assumption about human nature. Is there any hope for leaders who do not trust people?
There's no hope for people to believe that human beings need to be controlled to become true leaders. They will become managers, executives, but not true leaders. In fact, I'm not really an expert in that issue. I didn't study such companies. I studied the companies where leaders really shared this kind of beliefs in human nature. And then, but this is not enough, obviously, then decided that they don't want to live in what is called cognitive dissonance between what are their personal beliefs about human nature that they practice in their families and with their friends, but they don't practice in their companies. And so they decided to transform their corporations so that they can, as leaders, leave these values, their beliefs about human nature in their companies. That's what I studied, right? So the others, I don't know. I don't know what's their future. They're still around, obviously. There are many. Less and less in France. I don't know about other countries. I haven't heard. I've been in Japan last month. I know a couple of companies there of that, but not more. But freedom and responsibility and trust and respect and consideration and fairness build companies 100%, not 90, 100. There are more and more today, hundreds of those, and this movement is increasing with every day.
It's very interesting that the way you phrased your answer, that those executives going for freedom on corporations wanted to bring this fairness, this trust they had in their personal relations into the corporations. I have this feeling that trust and fairness, it's not something you have on a part of your life and not on the other. I think that this assumption that human nature is flawed is not something you have only at your work or only at your personal life. I sense that it's very hard to have those two different personas. And when I look into those huge challenges we have in organizations, and not only in organizations, but on the world, those to me are a reflection of this lack of trust. But I think that this shows more on the lack of ability that most of us have to truly listen to one another, to actually honor what the other is bringing and saying. Do you sense a similar thing, Professor?
Lucas, I studied leaders of organizations. I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not a sociologist, so I didn't study human relations. I studied leadership and transformational leadership. So the people I can talk about are leaders of the organizations. Those are the people whom I studied, whom I know, whom I right now meeting, exchanging a lot, because there's this whole movement, as I told you, in France and French-speaking countries going on. So these people, I know that for many of them, that was part of their life, having basically two, I wouldn't say that it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? But they had these two personalities. There's one CEO told me, I lived, and he was the investment banker, and then the CEO became a CEO of a company, and said, I always felt that I have two selves, my professional self and my personal self. My personal self is the one that has a certain beliefs and can live these beliefs through his life, and my professional self, no. Why? Because once you're in hierarchical bureaucracy, and you ask people to sign, to collect 5 signatures to buy a hard disk, you don't trust people. And that is not because you don't have these beliefs. It's because the organization and the structures make that you cannot practice it. So the question is, who is in charge of the structure of this organization? You as a CEO are, not a manager, not an employee, you. And the question is, are you going to do something to transform this organization so that you yourself can live your beliefs and practice them, and everyone else in the company? So that's what I observed. Now about relations generally, again, I didn't study so much the relations between people and organizations. I saw and I know that it became from conflict-ridden, tension-ridden, became also relationship based on trust, consideration, and so on. But again, I haven't focused on people, on teams. I have focused essentially on the leaders who transformed the organizations.
Yeah, I understand the focus. I'm actually trying to shed some light into the relationship of this leader with his crew, and wondering if you notice something in this direction. I understand the focus of your research, and we spoke a couple of times this week. But yeah, okay. Well, as we've been talking, I understand there are no formulas towards liberation. Professor, did you, though, identify common lessons on the liberating leaderships you researched?
Yeah, that was basically what I tried to focus, because once I immersed through a kind of ethnographical research, and I started to learn dozens of experiences of people coming from different industries, different type of companies, different sizes, different countries. The question was, and that was a bet, right? As a researcher, do they have some common points, all these experiences, right? And in fact, that was my articles and my book about. I think there's some echo. Do you hear me well?
Very well, Professor.
Because I'm getting an echo back from my own computer.
You might just might just reduce your volume a bit, and we should be all right.
Is it okay now?
Very good.
Very, very annoying for me. Anyway, I will try to do my best.
Wait, just 1 second. Could you mind going on mute? Isaac,
yeah.
Everybody. I think it's safe to come back on now. Let's see. You're still on mute.
Okay. Now it's okay, because you were echoing too, Mariana. Everyone was echoing.
Right.
Okay.
But now it looks like we're good. Thanks.
Now it's fine. So those are the lessons that I learned. The whole thing of building freedom and responsibility-based organizations is not an intellectual issue. I haven't met one leader that said, one day I've read a book and understood some kind of theory or some kind of model. Everything that I've heard was kind of emotional, and I would say even visceral experiences that people at some point saw or heard about examples, or they observed and visited the companies, and it resonated with their heart or resonated with their guts. It was not that somebody said, oh, I learned that these companies are doing great profits or growing, and that convinced me to enter this kind of corporate liberation. So this is the first thing. The second thing is, once you are hit by this kind of emotional or visceral discovery, and you are not willing to live a double life that we discussed, right? Because many people do live the double life, right? Remember, we discussed it. And then they may go, I don't know, on Sunday to church, for example, right? And then they rediscover this. But during 5 days, they live the life that they don't want to live. So once they say, I want to change this situation, then comes what I call the ground zero point. The ground zero point is, I'm going to build an organization that fundamentally trusts people for their intelligence, their capacity to provide solutions for the problems, opportunities that we encounter. And at the same time, I suffer from a big ego. Not eco, but ego. Which means that I consider myself being the most intelligent person in the company. That's why, by the way, I'm on the top of the pyramid. If this is the case, the CEO needs to do some work on himself or herself. Typically with a coach, it takes a couple of months. Of course, there are some heavy cases where you have to go to see a shrink, but usually it takes that time. Another issue, which is an important issue, before you can enter the whole transformation, right, is the question of the mandate. The fact that you're the CEO doesn't mean yet that you have a political mandate to transform an organization. You can be head of a business unit. What is your corporate CEO thinking? You can be a CEO of a family business. What are your stockholders thinking? Do they agree with this big transformation? So those are the things that you need to take care. Otherwise, you will enter the transformation liberation process and it will be a sure failure. Now, once this is done, there's obviously the question that is typical to this kind of organizations is building a common vision. It's not simply a statement, we'll do EBITDA 10% or increase market share by 3% every year. This is something that makes people dream. And it has to be built with the people typically, unless you are a real entrepreneur and it's a startup, then it's your dream. This has to be shared with everyone. It's a very big precondition, because once you will give people the freedom to make decisions, they need a criteria to decide why this decision is better than the other. And the criteria is, will it realize our vision or not? And after that you can start, it's very important, the quiet, silent phase where basically you're trying to build trust and respect based environment. This is not the case in most of the companies. And this phase is built basically by asking people, what are the things that today make you feel not trusted, not respected, that prevent you to do a good job, this kind of things, okay? And then work on it silently, not speaking about any liberation, anything. If you start to speak about liberation too early, you will create undue expectations that you will not be able to fulfill, because people will, of course, you'll make a huge, speech, public speech, basically the savior of humankind arrived, and it's me. And the people some will have tears in their eyes. They will go back to their workplace, and the situation will be the same as before. So you will create a lot of frustration. So those are the preliminary steps that I'm trying to describe. Just to show you, I won't elaborate on that this is a very, very, very complex process, has no recipes. It involves a lot of creativity on the part of the CEO and his teams. If it was easy, more people would do that.
Yeah, I do sense the lessons you gathered from different experience you researched. By reading your book, I got in touch with the experience with Bill Gore again in 1965. And Bill Gore believed that the way we talk about one another and about our jobs affects the way we think and the way we act. Could you give us some present-day example on this wisdom, Professor?
This is a very big topic, Lucas, that you're asking about the importance of a language.
Yes.
The language is very important. The language for anthropologists and sociologists is one of the key dimensions of a culture that you build. And every company that I studied have their own language, right? That's why many liberated companies are sometimes considered by other people as being cults. Perhaps you've heard about that already, that some of them are considered really as a cult because the way they speak, people don't understand. So if you take obviously the example of the company like Gore, people don't have jobs, they have commitments. But for example, the company Vertex that I described in my book that is in close to Philadelphia, the people don't, even the CEO, right, will not ever say to somebody, for example, his secretary, I need you to do this or that. He'll say,
Professor, I might be wrong, but I think what Bill Gore meant is that there is a huge strength on the intent that we bring forward. So you, on our last conversation with Ricardo, you brought up this beautiful image of this rowing boat where the 8 rowers would represent the people in a company, and you compared it to this Gallup survey showing engagement at work.
Right. But
yeah, for a regular company, there is 1 man rowing forward, 6 guys splashing water, pretending they are work, not really engaged, and then another 2 rowing backwards. So although we don't immediately see on those people, their engagement sprouts from their intent, from the way they speak, from the way they sense. Does this resonate with you? Wouldn't it be more related to engagement and the intent underneath what's going on?
I'm sorry, Lucas, I don't really see where you go. This is not something that I myself met in any of the companies that I studied, observed, and I perhaps observed several hundred. I've read about this kind of concepts. There is a notion of intent in military, it's very strong, and the commanders, and that's the example that I was telling you just before we stopped our conversation before, but it doesn't matter. But at any rate, people in military, for example, Marines, they don't give orders. They have this notion of intent, right? But anyway, this is, how to tell you, it's every company has their own words and their own habits. The point is that they avoid imposing on the other person, and they use the language that shows to that person that they have respect and trust in their ability to find solutions. And that's how you create engagement, because the way to create disengagement, something that you referred to, the Gallup survey, is telling the guy the order and asking him to comply and execute. This is the sure way to get disengaged, even actively disengaged people. If you want to engage somebody, then you say to him, I trust that if you take a little bit of time, you will find the solution. And that's how you get engaged. So the language is extremely important. But again, I go back to my point. That was a very important point in Bill Gore, that every culture develops its own language and they have their own code words. And so that's something that is called intent in some company will be called perhaps a suggestion, an idea, an opinion, for example, in some others, right? I give you one more example. John Wooden, who is a great leader. He's not a corporate leader. He's a coach, basketball coach. The greatest coach ESPN called him of 20th century. He said, never give an advice to somebody. Not an order, an advice. Because an advice very often interpreted by people, particularly if you're in a higher position, as almost an instruction of what you have to do. give an opinion. And it's a big difference between giving an advice and giving an opinion. So in my opinion, it could be interesting to do. So again, every company, every organization will have their own language, but the point is that the person feels that you trust and respect him instead of trying to use your power and tell him what to do. So that's maybe, I don't know if it answers your question, but it is very philosophical question. So
yeah, it's interesting because there are so many subtleties on this journey, isn't it? But I do follow you well, Professor. Thank you. So Professor Mariana is sending us now the first questions from the audience, the people who have been hearing to our introduction, and I'll bring you some of their curiosities and what they are interested in learning about liberated companies in France. Our first question comes from Armel, and this was a question submitted already before our talk, so it will get preference. So the question is, are there specific values and principles which systematically help a business owner ensuring the transformation of his organization? And if yes, which ones?
If the person means the values and principles of the leader, the answer is, of course, yes. We discussed it a little bit. If a leader doesn't have a certain amount of beliefs, I summarize them as a 3, basically, that every person needs to be respected, that every person has gifts, and that every person prefers to self-direct instead of being directed. Of course, you can extrapolate from these principles to some, neighboring principles. But basically, if the leader doesn't hold these 3 principles, it's impossible for him to liberate his corporation and to build a trust and freedom-based organization. So the answer obviously is yes.
Very good, very good. Professor, this next question comes from Austria. It was phrased by Tom. Tom is asking whether it wouldn't be desirable to build up the awareness for the corporate liberation during education at schools and universities.
Peter, right? This is the name of the person?
Tom.
Tom, I would be much more ambitious. What is the goal? Education is a mean. The goal is that every business leader in the world is aware that there is another way to run an organization. This is, for me, an ambitious goal worth pursuing. How do you get there? Obviously, educating. For example, I teach such classes in my business school is one of the means, but believe me, it's not enough. So how do you build an ecosystem in your country, because it's language specific? People in Austria, they listen to the German language more than they listen to English language. In France, more to French language, and so on. How do you build an ecosystem where basically there is so much information circulating, so much communication about this alternative way of running organization that they can't avoid being aware of that? That's what we achieved in France.
Professor, on the same subject of education, we have another question from Sophie. Sophie wants to know if we can imagine liberated schools.
We can. There are, in fact, we're now talking about Semco, where we're now with the Semco Style organization here, and Ricardo Semler, who, as far as I know, is a deep believer in the importance of educating people from the early age towards freedom and responsibility instead of obeying teachers. He created a school. It's called Lumiere, right, Lucas?
Exactly, yes, Lumiere. It's actually 3 schools.
But there's not only Lumiere, you have Montessori system, you have Summerhill in London, you have Freitas schools in France. There are a certain amount of schools, and I'm talking about obviously middle school, I mean primary, middle, high schools, right? Regarding the universities, I think that I don't know of examples where you have universities built in that way. I described one in my book, which is a Virginia University, that was like that when Jefferson created it. Basically self-directing, self-run by professors and by students. But it's not the case today. Again, I don't want to be disrespectful. I don't think that the key engine, the key way to change our world is a university. The key place to change our world is a corporation, not university, not government, not hospital. All of these institutions are important. But if we change the way corporations are run, we can change the world.
Very good. Professor, our third question comes from a gentleman called Raphael. Raphael wants to know if all the leaders you studied for your book were CEOs.
A very good question. In fact, I get a lot of emails, and messages, LinkedIn, and so on, and obviously there are much more managers than CEOs, right? And so the most of the readers of my book with Brian are managers, I mean, not CEOs. And they agree with this whole approach, and they wonder if they can be the people who bring upon a transformation in the organizations. Unfortunately, I will have to make some funny stories, very short ones, because they have to be funny. One manager bought my book when at one of my conferences, asked to sign to his boss, CEO, left on the desk of his boss when the boss was not in his office, came later and said, wow, you're reading this book. What do you think of this book? And that's how he started the conversation and brought his boss awareness. But not to tell too many jokes, the issue is very simple. Yes and no. Yes, people coming from different levels and organizations, including my former students that just are the first year in their bank or organization. They learned it from me in our class. They made their CEO aware that there is another way to run a company, as a manager can do. But, and this is the no thing, the only person that has a mandate and the power in organizations to transform the organization is the CEO of a business unit. Don't mistake that by the CEO of a large corporation. If it's a small and medium company, then it's CEO. But if it's large corporation, you do the liberation, transformation at every business unit, one business unit at a time. I hope I answered the question.
I think you did. I think you covered it very well. Professor Getz, there's another question here. We didn't get to know who sent it. It's an anonymous question. And it says that we are talking about CEOs, but whether you don't think if that the board on a company has much more impact on liberation than the CEO.
No, they do have the person that writes about it, asks about it, talks about governance. It's a very important issue. Remember, I told you that the fact that you're a CEO, on the paper, you have a mandate to transform your organization. On the paper, because basically you are accountable for the results, and on the paper, you have the mandate to devise all the means to achieve that result. Not only to hire or to buy something, but to create an organization that allows it. But the moment you start to touch extremely sensible things, for example, the budgeting and reporting, centralized purchasing, the role of HR, the org chart, and all these kind of things, obviously you can't do that without having an approval of the board of directors or any kind of governing board that's supervising your action. Because this is an open heart surgery. This is not just a cosmetic thing. Okay, so she's absolutely right that you need the approval, but the board of directors is not the one who is running the organization inside. And he is not, they can say, okay, or we don't agree, but once they said okay, it's then to the CEO, general manager, whoever is the title, and the people to make this transformation.
Our next question goes into different sectors. So the question comes from Giorgio Patkos, and Giorgio is interested to know whether you think that the model entreprise libérée is applicable in the retail sector, specifically supermarkets.
Okay, Giorgio, two things. It's not a model, it's a philosophy, and I don't think I saw. So what I'm talking to you is not something that is a theoretical. We have in France, and this is not only France, it's Europe, a certain amount of chain stores, retail chains, that already are applying what you call entreprise libérée, in English, liberated companies, so corporate liberation. The chains like Decathlon, that you may know, who sell sports goods, the chain like Kiabi, who sell apparel, the chain like Noroto, who repair cars. And so there are more and more of them, and they're not small organizations, that are large European or worldwide organizations that are doing that. Generally speaking, Giorgio, human beings are human beings. Whether they work in a chain store, in a hospital, in a military, in a municipality, in a bank, they have the same human needs. If you don't satisfy these needs, we talked about that, respect, the possibility to grow and to self-direct, you get people who are disengaged or actively disengaged anywhere. There are specifics in industries, as there are specifics in countries, as there are specifics of the size of the company, but people are people and will react in the same way. They will revert to 9 to 5, do their minimum, and let you fail as a head of the organization.
Interesting. We have another question here that also relates to the leadership situation. The question was phrased by Alceu Bravo, and I would bet he's Brazilian by his name, but he didn't say it. So when leaders face the dual self reality that you mentioned earlier, what do most of them decide to do? Do they transform or do they leave the company?
Okay, there are three things. And he's this Brazilian guy, he's, I think, a good psychologist. There are three possibilities. The number one is you continue to suffer. Live this frustration every day. And you hopefully compensate that on the weekend, right? Because on the weekend with your family, maybe your religion, whatever you do, you can kind of rejoin yourself. Second possibility, I learned it right from Mariana, the runaway. You can run away from the corporate world because you have enough of experience observing in your own company and other companies, and you say everyone is like that, right? There's hierarchical bureaucracies, there's no hope. So you may, do something. There are a lot of former corporate people who are in different or non-government organizations or politics, although politics are, I think, even worse, right? And the last, and those are the small minority, really small minority. At the top, right? Because we discussed you need to be at the top.
Dear Professor Getz, your connection is breaking a bit.
Okay, I will maybe, is it better now?
It is better. Yes, if you could answer this last part. We lost your last phrase.
Okay. So I said that I said there are three possibilities, right? And the last possibility was there are the minority, the people who instead of leaving the frustration, instead of running away, they say, I am the head of this organization, small or average or whatever, and I will try together with the people in this organization to transform it. And so they are the builders of the future.
That's very good. We have another very good question here. It comes from Bonita Roy. Bonita wants to know what happens to strategic conversations in liberated organizations.
I hope she doesn't work for McKinsey, but this kind of things, by the way, are today pretty accepted. Strategic planning and all this kind of things today don't work anymore. The question is, I know a large corporation, they're in energy sector. They did during 1 year 11 budgeting exercises, not 1, 11, because every time they did the budgeting exercise, the price of the oil changed. So they went to do it again. So how about strategic planning, right? Everyone understands that today it's a nonsense in that's called VUCA world, right? Volatile, unstable, complex, and ambiguous. And so the question is, how do we evolve in such a world? It's called sometimes agile organizations, right? Resilient. I like the term of Nassim Taleb, what's called anti-fragile organizations. The question is, how do you build them? And in liberated companies, that's what you do. The responsibility to listen to the world, to capture the weak signals, these little changes in the behavior of our clients, new technologies and so on, is the responsibility of everyone. And if somebody catches something that may be relevant, not necessarily danger, but may be relevant, he brings this outside information in and shares it and asks this question, what does it mean to our vision dream? We said we are going to Brazil. Is it the right destination? We're hearing that in Brazil, it's not maybe the right place to be in 1 year when you reach it. Because I've heard that. Have you heard something like that? And so you start this strategic conversation, I would say, right? Strategize level of all the employees who are frontline, and this is a wonderful word, frontline, because they're on the front line, exposed to the world, instead of sitting on the 15th floor of the corporate building and seeing just helicopters, right?
Very good, very good. Professor, we are getting to the end of our hour.
Okay.
It's a very big pleasure to hear you and learn from your experience and your research. We are very honored with you sharing your time during this week with us. Hopefully we will have more of your past experiences shared with our public through the next videos we will be sharing, and also with your conversation with Ricardo. Just to let you know, Bonita just answered saying she didn't work for McKinsey.
Oh, yeah, okay, Bonita, may I add maybe to all the speakers, because they're coming from different, all our audience countries. The book, of course, exists in English, and all of them read in English, but it exists also in Swedish, Hungarian, Czech, Dutch, of course, French. It's in the process of being translated into South Korean, in Korean, Chinese, Hebrew. So it's continuing, but unfortunately not yet to German. So there are some people that want to see this book, and it's a real phenomenon in France, right? In France, it's the best-selling book in business management for several years. That's how it become, you make people aware, right, of that exists. The book, the journalists write about it, and so on and so on. So please don't hesitate to write me. You can find me Isaac Getz on Google. And if you have some ideas of how to make to bring this information to the awareness of the CEOs and leaders in your sport France to the whole world. We don't want that it just stays in France. We want that this becomes a norm and changes the lives.
That is fantastic, Professor. Thank you very much. Would you say you farewell to the people watching us today, Professor Getz?
Sure. So what should I do? I have just to stay until they say goodbye, or how does it work?
There is a good à bientôt would be enough. Thank you very much, Professor.
Okay, goodbye. So I'm leaving, right?
I have a quick,
Yes?
quick question, Professor, before you leave. Actually, one of our participants asked, Earl Acosta asked if there's an audiobook version of the book. I wasn't able to find one on Amazon.
So there is. Right. The Marta asks, what's the name? The name in English is called Freedom Inc., like Freedom Incorporated, right? Freedom Inc. And you have it both in printed and in ebook. To my knowledge, I think it's ebook in dollars, like $7-something, right? And you can find on Amazon in all the countries, right? So yes, the Freedom Inc. And in every other language, sometimes it's called a little bit different. But if you type Getz and Carney, Brian Carney is my co-author, you'll find it easily.
Great, great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I am going to jump back on video right now to close out the webinar. Oh, actually, sorry.
Thank you, Lucas.
Lucas actually wanted to say something before the very end.
Yes, I want to thank you all in the audience for sharing your time and questions with us. Mariana, thank you very much for your support. How did you like our chat today, Mariana?
I thought it was great. It was a lot more. I liked the professor's very assertive style and really pushing and questioning, and that's how you learn, right? By pushing and questioning and getting into uncomfortable spaces. So I'm always a fan of those types of conversations. So thank you so much, Professor, for your time. Thank you, Lucas, as always. Thank you to our participants. Armel just thanked you, Lucas, for the quality of the questions. So thank you, everybody. Yes, I agree. There were so many good questions. Thanks to everyone who submitted before. Thanks to the people who submitted during the webinar. It was great seeing you all here today. This is the last Semco Style Chat of this series. We're going to let you know as soon as we come up with the new schedule. So if you want to be up on that, you will receive an email. If you are not signed up to our email yet, you can go to semco.style and sign up there, and then you'll be able to get an email. Also, my colleague Ian just posted the link to the survey. It should only take between 2 and 5 minutes. If you have any feedback for us, it really helps us bring you better content. And if you have any insights you want to share on social media, do so with the hashtags WorkWise and Semco Style as always. Make sure to join our community on LinkedIn if you haven't yet. The link for that is also in the chat. And yes, so I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you. Stay in touch, and we'll see you online. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.